Welcome back to Critic number 6 here, the last episode. Today we'll be talking about the cool cucumber, the Cadillac of curves, also known as the MP curve, or formerly the monetary policy curve. This curve is illustrated right here, this flat line. Boom, that's it, MP curve. But it's more complex than that. So I drew here this red line, which represents the IS curve. And we can see here where equilibrium meets. And so these curves are often used together to find out the equilibrium of the market. And the market on the y-axis, x-axis here is the output gap. And on the y-axis, we have long-term real interest rate. So this blue line is what we're going to talk about, and that's the most important one here. And what it shows is how the central banks, like Bank of Canada, the Fed, the interest rates that they set, the short-term ones called overnight rates, impact the output gap. So the way that at what level the MP is set, the short-term interest rate is set by the Fed or the central bank, is what changes the level. So if they boost the short-term real interest rate, then equilibrium is going to go back. And so they do this to adjust for the IS. As the IS shifts, they kind of do this to prepare and try to keep that output gap growing or at zero so that they don't have too much effect in the economy. Now, I know what all of you are wondering, and that's, how do you calculate this? How do we know what percentage that is? What percent the long-term real interest rate is? Here's how we do it. I drew it out right here. This is the payday, the eat more bar of all candy bars, is I plus TSE plus DP minus pi E. Now, what does that mean? That's just a bunch of letters. I is the short-term nominal interest rate. The DP is default premium. TSE is the term structure effect. And pi E is expected inflation. Now, that's a lot of just just numbers or things like that we're just throwing around. But this is all important because it assumes it's constant. It assumes that the Bank of Canada or the central bank can keep it constant. And so that's why the MP is flat, because it keeps the long-term real interest rate flat or constant. And so these are all important in calculating what this MP curve means. And so this is kind of the most important part of calculating it here. So since we've talked a little bit about the biggest question here of solving this equation, we also have to deal with these kind of TSE and DP. What do those mean? And that comes in the difference between short-term and long-term interest rates, nominal interest rates. And so the long-term interest rate is equal to the interest rate plus the term structure effect plus the default premium. And so the risk and the term structure those two things have a huge effect and contribute to the long-term real interest rate of the market. So that's why the central bank can more effectively adjust the short-term interest rate, but not so much the long-term, because they can't really control too much the default premium or the term structure effect in the equation. So that's huge and that's important. So they're related in some way, but not completely. They're not completely, like long-term is not equal to short-term because of the term structure effect and the default premium. So after we just waged war over here with the long-term and short-term relations of the interest rates, we have to see what makes this MP curve bounce, what makes it go up and down. And that is a good question. So by using this equation here, this equation for the MP curve that we talked about, we can make a good assumption of what causes the MP curve to go up or what causes the MP curve to go down. And so an increase to any of these first three variables or a decrease to this variable makes this number overall larger. And so when that happens, an increase to any of these three or a decrease to this one, then the MP curve will shift up. And when the MP curve shifts up, the real long-term real interest rate will increase and the output gap will decrease. So it's going to cause the equilibrium to be here. Of course, normally this is done in response to shifting the IS curve to keep the output gap similar. But if no change was made in the IS curve, it would decrease the output gap. On the other hand, if any of these things went down and this went up, then the curve would go down, and that would make the output gap larger because equilibrium would then be here for a 3% growth, and that would make the long-term real interest rate decrease. And so that's the important part of it is this is so crazy how it affects the central bank, can change macroeconomically the outlook of the economy, how well the economy is spending, and they do this in effort to they often increase their interest rates during booms to reduce inflation and decrease their interest rates during recessions to increase inflation. And we see examples of that today, and that's so important, is that we can see how the central bank is trying to encourage spending or interest rate savings so that companies or firms buy and invest more or save and things like that. So it's super important, and I hope you learned something. I for sure. Good luck on your finals. And